Hello and welcome to a relevant instrument reviews thing. Today we're going to be going over this, which is a 1923 Conn 67i Baritone, and we're going to be going over the basic state of it before I get anywhere else on it, and what needs to be done to get it back into playable condition, because it clearly is not in that state right now. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the history of how we got it, and what it is, and then the general state going from the lead pipe to the bell of all the terrible things wrong with it, and then what we plan to do with it in the future. So this is, as I said before, a 67i Baritone by C.G. Conn, built in 23. So this is basically the companion model to their, I believe it's an 82 and 83i euphonium. They're basically the same wrap, and they are basically the euphonium and baritone versions of the same instrument. Their only differences are that this one is marketed to a kind of more student audience, has a smaller bore, the bell is a half-inch smaller. It's basically just supposed to be an easier to play but less full-sounding instrument. So we don't really know much about what terrible things happened to this up until about 6 months ago, and this was given to us by a local repair shop because he was never going to get around to restoring it, and it had been previously restored rather poorly by someone who looked like used electrical solder to really terribly redo basically all the solder connections that are undone right now. So they left a huge amount of solder around just about everything. And there was also rosin, because there was rosin core flux that was making a further mess of everything, so it was very fun to clean up. So we got it, and we basically just pulled it apart to figure out everything that was wrong with it, and so we could restore it properly. So, we're going to begin at the lead pipe, as I said. So, luckily, it's generally in pretty good shape. So there's a small crack in the lead pipe running around halfway around here, and the brace for the lead pipe where it attaches the bell, which you can see here, is broken off. That was filled with probably way too much solder, building a giant mound. You can kind of see the remnants of there that was trying to hold it together. I guess it did its job, but it was horrendously awful looking and really annoying to undo because it was a lot of molten metal falling down. So running back around, now we've got, there's a little bend in the lead pipe here. We're not going to worry about it because it's really not worth the effort. I don't really know a proper way to restore that. Has a missing water key here. It had basically all the bits except the key itself. Originally, we pulled those off just so we could try and make it seal better. It was in semi-playable condition, but we're going to replace that with a modern Amato water key, so it'll just be easier to deal with. So then this tuning slide is a little bit sticky, but it's not really a big issue in the grand scheme of things, so we're not going to deal with that. The first valve's tuning slide is stuck, as is the second valve. But the valves themselves are in decent shape. There's a decent amount of plating that's come off, but they seem to seal decently. I'm saying decent a lot. Then the third valve is where it gets fun. The tuning slide is unstuck, but you'll notice a very glaring lack of a finger button there. So that is right here. And the previous owner, in keeping with the theme of things, decided to fix that too, because I guess it had come out at one point. It soldered into the valve piston itself, but that must have come undone at some point, so they did their standard way too much electrical solder on it to hold it in place. That didn't work because it was out when we got it, so we're just going to resolder that as well. But that valve is also in decent shape, apart from a bit of solder that seems to have come through a little hole that goes into the actual first port for this bit of tubing, I believe. And we're probably not going to try and bother with that just because I'm worried about making a bigger mess of things. So then we run around here, everything's really just fine. In fact, there's a few little dents up at this top bow, but apart from that, it's basically fine. There's a missing brace here, which is one of them that we just pulled off because it was also been damaged at one point and had a lot of solder on it, so we're just going to clean that up and try and make this fit on properly again. And then we get to here, which is where the bottom bow attaches, like so. Come to this side. And this is where it gets fun. This is where the copious amounts of solder were added. This one is in actually decent shape, but it seems that either through corrosion, terrible negligence, or maybe they're using too hot of temperatures with their solder, which I highly doubt because there's such a mess. It seems that there are little bits of this actual little thing here that have actually been nicks out of it. There's nothing we can do about that, but just put the rest of it back together so that becomes a minimal issue. It's really just aesthetic, not actually functional in terms of issues. Get down to the bottom bow, which is in basically fine shape. There's another brace that's missing. That one we also pulled off, and we'll just put it on another date. I think it has the brace itself. No, this is one of the two missing, yes, the two missing braces on this instrument. And those are going to be fun because they're proper, nicely ornamented braces that you can't just replace with off-the-shelf parts or anything you can make easily with just some brass rod. So we're just going to turn that on one of our wood lathes, you know, high quality, and try and make as close a replica as we can. So then we continue around. It's basically fine. There are a few dings in this bow guard plate. They're pretty significant in a smaller term, and I don't know. They're pretty large, but because they're going through two pieces of brass, it's really not worth the effort. I tried to take this one out, it doesn't really work. It's a little bit out of round here, again, not worth the effort. And this one, this connection point, has the same sort of issues right about here, where it has bits of the actual piece that are missing. And again, we're just not going to try and bother with trying to fix anything on that. It's just an aesthetic issue, and really it's impractical to try and restore. And then we get up to the bell. So on the bell, there's a number of dents around it, particularly on this brace here, which attaches up near the lead pipe to the rest of the instrument. And it seems while it was still put together, at some point it got whacked like that, so it has dented this section in. We need to straighten that out before we put it back together so that everything fits together properly. There's also a brace here, and that is one of them that is also missing. It's a much shorter brace, so it'll be less of a mess to deal with, but also needs to be replaced. Luckily it has the two plates that go on either side. It's just the rod part that's missing. And then we get to the bell, which is rather creased. I really don't know how to take out creases safely at the moment, so we're probably going to leave this until it's put back together. And I particularly don't want to worry about this or make a mess of it, for that matter, mainly because it has a quite good condition gold wash bell, which, because it's such a thin layer of gold, will come off quite easily if you're not careful about how you do the dent work, at least in my opinion. The bell is also rather out of round, you can see in the video, and that's, I think, another part of the crease, and we'll just deal with that at a later date when the instrument's put back together. So, speaking of which, what's happening with this in the future? So we're going to start by just putting this thing back together, where you have to get some rod to replace those braces that are missing, but basically we're just going to put it back together to how it was and make it a playable instrument, and then we can really figure out how it plays. When we first got it, kind of bodged it back to working to some extent, and there's a video I'll put in the description about that, that shows that, but it basically wasn't practically playable. We couldn't tell its playing characteristics from that. So when we get it back together, we're going to figure out just how nicely it plays, if it's a good instrument, and mainly because it's a small bore instrument, if it's going to manage the low range decently. And if it does, we're going to move to another phase of the project where at least I would like to, and I've worked on some plans for this, I'd like to replace this section of lead pipe, which runs from the main tuning slide into the valve section, and I'd like to put a fourth valve on this. So because of space constraints, it'll probably be up here somewhere. It's going to be a rotor valve, probably from the attachment of a valve trombone, and we'll figure out how that stuff works later. Luckily for us, this is a high-pitch instrument, so we have a little bit of extra space to work with if we wish for this to play in low pitch, which is, for those of you who don't know, low pitch puts A at 440 Hertz, and high pitch puts A at 452 Hertz. So there's probably somewhere around a quarter tone of difference between that, so you can get away with a little bit of extra tubing. In the process of adding that fourth valve, I'm going to just have it wrap around down here, and that would be that. We'd have a horn style trigger, just like on the B flat to A, B flat to F change on double horns, because that's where we come from. But that's about all we have planned for this. And the final part of restoring this instrument is going to be rebuilding an original case for this, or at least as close a replica as we can make. Luckily, one of our friends has an 83i, the euphonium variant of this, with its original case, and we're going to use that as our reference to build our own case for this, because it's the same wrap, basically the same everything. The case design should be very close to identical. So we already have the original badging for it. We have some of the latches, but we need a little bit more of the hardware, which is a little hard to come by because of how old these are, and they don't actually make the same kind of latches that they used to use on these cases. So that's going to be the fun part, but hopefully we're going to get started on that soon, and then we'll have basically a complete instrument. I'll have to get a baritone mouthpiece for it as well, and then we will have ourselves a working Conn 67i, and it will be amazing. So thanks for watching this ramble. I don't really know what this was, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.